Welcome, everybody. My name's Gus Carlson, and I'm delighted to be your host tonight. And pardon my back as I turn around.
It's tricky, isn't it?
It is tricky. It is tricky. I have three important, they're tasks, but they're privileges tonight as your host. The first is to welcome you all, and thank you for joining us. The second is to thank Thomson Reuters for sharing this great space with us.
Yeah.
Hope you've all had a chance to look at it. And to thank Thomson Reuters for its continued support of competitive sailing. For 2011, Thomson Reuters will be sponsoring the Atlantic Cup, the Transatlantic Race, and I know there are a number of New York Yacht Club members here tonight. Welcome. The Annapolis-Newport Race, Marblehead Halifax, and the Vineyard Race. And I'm pleased to say that Aurora, my boat, will be sailing under the Thomson Reuters colors again this year. So thank you very much. My third privilege tonight is to introduce our guest of honor. We all know who he is. He's a remarkable guy who's led a remarkable life and had remarkable achievements. When I was a boy learning how to sail in the Great Lakes, he was an icon for me, a hero. And years later when I met him, he didn't disappoint.
Aw. Woo! Thank you.
He was every bit the hero I thought he should be, and more. And I'm really privileged to have this.
Thanks, Gus.
Have the chance to be here with you tonight. You know, we all know Gary for all his accomplishments: winning sailor, great teacher, accomplished author, videographer, father, loving father. I know one of his daughters is here tonight.
Wife, yeah.
Devoted husband, and great guy. But I think what a lot of us know Gary as is he's a master of what is almost a dying art, and that is storytelling. And for those of you who've sailed with Gary, you know Gary's ability to tell a story, and another story, and another story. But for those of you who sail, and sail long distances, you know that crew morale goes up and down, and there's nothing like a great story to motivate. We did the Newport Bermuda race last year on Aurora, and Gary was on board. And we just come through a bumpy crossing of the Gulf Stream. The wind was lightning, the crew was tired, and we still had a long, long way to go to Bermuda. Gary pops up out of the companionway, looks around at the droopy crew, and he says in a loud voice, asks this question: how many of you have spent at least one night in jail?
That got everybody's attention.
It got their attention. And then Gary went on to tell the story that in his entire sailing career, on all the boats he'd raced on, he'd asked that same question. And the answer, almost every time, was half the crew members on every race boat had spent one night in jail. Now I'm looking around at all the sailors and they're saying, yeah, that sounds about right. Maybe a little low, but yeah. And then I'm looking at all the families and the spouses and the loved ones and they're saying, that's appalling. But the point of the story is, there's nothing like a great story told by a great storyteller to motivate people and to motivate a crew. Now I know what you want to ask, and no, I'm not going to tell you what the ratio on Aurora was. Some of them aren't here tonight, and that's why.
Are they in jail?
But we're here tonight to... Yeah, sure. It's all under the sponsorship budget program. But we're here tonight to celebrate a great storyteller telling great stories. And for those of you who have read or have had a chance to read bits of an American sailing story, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And tonight we have so many special people here tonight. but someone I want to recognize is Alex Kahn, who is the publisher of Gary's book. Alex, can you just stand up?
Thank you. His wife, Susan.
This is Gary's 18th book?
17.
17th book. Sorry. Memoirs 2 will be out when? In 3 years. So without further ado, I wanted to introduce to you a great storyteller, a great sailor, a great friend, and an extraordinary guy, Gary Jobson.
Thank you. Thank you, Gus. Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Okay. So picking off where you left off, how many here have actually spent a night at government expense? Well, there's some truthful ones, I can tell that. Anyway, the ratio of most boats is 50% of a crew will have had a bad night somewhere along the way. It happens. So Alex, thank you very much for publishing the book, and your wife Susan here for working so hard on it. And we went back and forth, and thank you. It was great that you came all the way down from Hanover, New Hampshire, or Vermont. I'm not sure which side of the river you live on, but thank you for coming. And I'd also like to introduce Cynthia Goss, who was my co-author here. And I told her I'm not going to have her come up and tell four favorite stories. She kind of shrunk for that. But anyway, we had a lot of fun working on the book. And thank you for keeping me honest and occasionally saying, that's a little braggy. So anyway, here's the format. I am going to tell about 20 stories. And looking around the room at so many friends, you're going to recognize some of these tales. And then I have a 4-minute trailer of a film that I've just finished, and we're going to look at 4 minutes of it at the end, which has nothing to do with the sport of sailing. So I'm about 5 years old, maybe 6, and I'm at the Beechwood Yacht Club on Barnegat Bay, New Jersey, and it's the afternoon Saturday race, and over the horizon are 4 amazing boats coming at us. These are ACATs with giant mainsails, and they're coming downwind, and you can't tell who's in the lead. And at the moment, there are kids in the water, penguins and sunfish and prams being put away. The beach pavilion is fully engaged, people getting ice cream. And as the 4 boats, named the Bat, the Lotus, the Spy, and the Marianne, are coming in toward the finish, everybody stops to watch this great finish. And in these days, courses weren't perfect. There was a barrel number 17 off the dock at the Beechwood Yacht Club, and about 6 lengths later, there was the beach. And here they are. Southeast breeze, 15, 18 knots. These boats are coming in. And anyway, all of a sudden, they came across the line. And all the boats within a length or so. And with that, to avoid the beach, all 4 boats made big sweeping turns up into the wind. The mainsails came down, the boom right into the boom crotch, and it went silent, and everybody cheered. And that was my first recollection of how cool the sport of sailing was. And I think the Lotus actually won that race. So the year was about 1956, and that image is in my mind. Well, good news. About a week or 2 later, I got invited to do a race. My very first sailboat race on something called a sneak box. This wooden, leaky, 15-foot boat with a gaff rig, and I'm given 3 jobs. My jobs are not to say anything or ask any dumb questions. Here's a bucket and a sponge. These things are leaky. And most importantly, here is the course chart. You're going to tell us what random marks we're sailing around Barnegat Bay. Well, I'll never forget it. It's called the Hodling Trophy. 40 sneak boxes, the first race of my life, 40 boats, and we rounded the first mark in the lead. I still have this image of 39 boats behind us. And the boat was bone dry. I hadn't asked a dumb question all the way upwind. Then the skipper asked what the next mark of the course was. And I reached into my pocket. The course chart had somehow fallen out. We went to the wrong buoy and lost the race. I never got to sail with those guys again. But for the rest of my career, I have known what the course is and what the goal is. So anyway, that was an auspicious beginning. Now, when I think about all the sailing I've done over the years, probably the most horrific race that I was ever part of was the infamous Fastnet Storm of 1979. This is a 605-miler on the south coast of England. dates back to 1925, goes on every other year. And in 1979, 303 boats started that race. Only 87 would reach the finish line. 15 lives were lost, 5 boats were sank, and I was with Ted Turner on the yacht Tenacious. And at that night, I kept thinking, what is this? How am I going to describe what 30 to 35 foot waves are all about? And Turner kept popping up at the hatch and yelling at me to take my hat off. Well, why, Ted? So you can feel the wind. It's blowing 60 knots. And as you're sailing along, occasionally I see a green light, then a red light. A boat is coming the other way. Which way do you go to avoid these boats coming at us? Anyway, it was a horrific night. We ended up winning that race, and that Fastnet storm, the aftermath is that yacht racing became a lot safer and a lot more attention to safety rules after that moment. So anyway, kind of a crucial moment in the sport of sailing. Okay, next story. As you can imagine, and there's lots of them in this book, I have sailed with some very interesting people in my career. Very interesting people. And some of these people are great at some things and not good at others. But one thing they all have in common is they all have a passion for sailing. Take Herbert von Karajan, for example. Herbert von Karajan was the concert conductor for life of the Berlin Philharmonic. The Berlin Philharmonic, he owned a company called Deutsche Phone, Gramophone, and he was quite a passionate sailor. And I can remember flying over, and he picked me up in south of France at the Nice airport in his panting Ferrari and took me for a ride in the hills of southern France. I've never been so fast in a car before. And I must have looked a little nervous, and he stopped the car and looked at me and says, "Gary, my friend, the trick of a good driver is how many flies you can kill with the side windows." This was a man who was 75 years old, and that's the way he was driving. And Janice and I met him one time in Zurich, and he picked us up in his Falcon 10 jet. And again, I was surprised to find out that he was a co-pilot. "Gary, my friend, don't worry, I'll land this plane just like a butterfly with sore feet." So I spent 5 summers sailing with the great maestro and won Maxi World Championship. We were second going into the last race. Our arch rival Kealoha is a half a mile ahead of us with 60 miles to go under a spinnaker run going downwind. All afternoon, we're catching up to Kealoha, and with a mile or so to go, we got in the inevitable luffing match, crossed the line ahead of Kealoha to win the race and the Maxi World Championship. And I saw this image of the maestro with his hands across his chest yelling, "Bravo," as he just finished Beethoven's Ninth. So we come in, tears streaming down his eyes. So we come into the dock, and Juan Carlos, the King of Spain, comes over to congratulate the maestro on his victory. And the maestro is very proud to have the king and the entourage come over. And after the congratulations, I shot back to the king, "And you guys had a nice race too. Good going." The king leaves, and the maestro got very mad at me, and he said, "You don't call the king yous guys." But remember, I grew up in New Jersey, so. And then, of course, there was the couple summers we rented a little beach house in Normandy Beach, and every afternoon when the southeaster came up, I would take my laser out into the surf and sail around. And just one day, a northeaster came in, 6 to 8 foot waves breaking on the surf. It was so windy that we had to reef the sheets on the bed. So windy, there were whitecaps in the toilet. Windy. So looking at these big waves, the northeaster breaking on the beach at Normandy, I decided this would be a day to take the laser out for a ride. So I rigged up my laser about 8:30 in the morning, and I would try to get the boat through the surf. And the wave would take me and put it back on the beach. Again, I would try to get through the surf, back on the beach. Finally, I got out and started sailing. Upwind, downwind, reaching around, it was great. After 2 hours, almost exhausted, I got some inspiration by the surfers out there now surfing into the beach. And it gave me an idea. Maybe I can surf the laser back into the beach. So with the surfers out by the surf line with 35 knots of wind, I waited for the perfect wave. It came in the shape of a curve. It was laughing at me. Come on, buddy, ride this wave. And with that, I took off, hiking hard, centerboard up. The boat rose up from the bottom of the wave to the top of the wave. I could identify with the Beach Boys song, catch a wave and you're sitting on top of the world. When suddenly the boat dropped from the top of the wave to the bottom of the wave and nosedive, with me on the transom, now catapulted head over shoulders into the surf. The Jersey City crowd wanting to know who this nutcase was out in a boat. Anyway, the wave broke over my head. I stood up. The water was waist deep. I felt my bones, nothing was broken. And then I looked at my laser. The mast cut in half, the sail ripped in half. I never did find the centerboard, but every now and then in life, you gotta go for the ultimate. And for me, that was the ultimate moment in a sailboat. Fast forward. About a year later, I'm sailing with the great Dr. Jerry Milgram of MIT. And I started wondering, I wonder how fast I was sailing in the laser. And Dr. Milgram and I are walking along out in Hawaii, and I'm describing this, and he's thinking, and how fast. And anyway, after about 2 minutes of silence, you imagine what's going through his head, he stops and he says, "How deep was the water? How deep was the water?" And I told him I was about 3.5 feet. Okay, you were doing 10.2 knots. I have no idea if he was right, but it felt really good. Now, when we've had the Whitbread Round the World race and the Volvo Ocean race come up Chesapeake Bay, very cool. And one of the races, the Volvo, I had arranged with my friend Paul Kayard to jump on Pirates of the Caribbean and be off Norfolk, Virginia, and ride up the Chesapeake Bay, and I had my little camera. I got down to Norfolk, and the protector boat with 2 big engines suddenly was broken down, and we couldn't get out to the boat. But $200, I commandeered a 16-foot Zodiac, and off I went with the driver out into the sea. This is April, 15 miles off Norfolk, in a 16-foot Zodiac. And here, and I can hear the Disney music of Pirates of the Caribbean, comes Kayard over the horizon. He's doing 23 knots, and I got to get from this dinghy up to that boat. I called him on the radio, "Paul, I know you're racing. Do you think you could slow down a little for me?" And he did. He got it down to 10 knots, and somehow I pulled myself up on the rail, and I was on board. It was a fast ride, halfway up to the Chesapeake Bay. But here's a shock. That night, if you can believe this, the wind died on Chesapeake Bay. I know, it's hard to believe. We don't advertise this fact, but it happened. We even anchored for a while because the current was heading us back south. The next day, a northeaster comes through, or a northwester comes through in the morning, and we're going upwind. Now, for those who've been on the Chesapeake, you might know there's a place about 8 or 10 miles south of Annapolis called the Brickyard. Called the Brickyard because it's mighty shallow, maybe about 8 feet deep. These Volvo boats draw 16. And we are heading for the Brickyard. Now, as a journalist on the boat with the camera, I'm not supposed to help the crew. But I'm looking at us heading right for where I think is not good. So I simply asked, "Do you guys have a chart on this boat?" That got the scramble going, and soon enough, right up onto the mud flat there, we were aground. So Kayard and his crew all out on the end of the boom, using the canting keel, hailing the thing over to bounce the boat off the Brickyard. And in the middle of this melee, I'm standing there with my camera, and Kayard looks around and says, "You're not filming this, are you?" "Oh, yeah." I got an Emmy for that show. We have locked the door. This program is 4 hours long. So I'm going to apologize in advance for the name dropping of this story. I apologize, but it's a damn good story. Like I said, some people are good at some things, but not everything. So about 10 years ago, I'm out in San Francisco Bay racing with Larry Ellison on his maxi boat, Sayonara. And one of the weekends I was out there, my friend Ted Turner showed up to come sail with us. And it took a while for Ted to get on board the boat and steer the boat, but he got on board and steered, and that Saturday night, Larry had a dinner for us at his very nifty pad in San Francisco overlooking the bridge. And he had one of his friends, Stephen Jobs, there. And Ted had his wife, at least at the time, Jane Fonda. And after the dinner, Stephen Jobs said that he had a new Pixar film. Would we like to see it? So we went down a couple flights and to this really nifty theater, and Stephen Jobs gives Larry the DVD to put into the machine, but he can't get it to work. So I'm sitting there on the couch watching the biggest, or the second biggest software manufacturer in the world not being able to run the DVD. So Stephen Jobs gets up to help him, the head of Apple Computer and Pixar Pictures. He can't do it either. So Ted Turner gets up. Now, Ted, at the time, Ted is the largest stockholder of the biggest media company in the world, Time Warner, and he's helping. And then Jane Fonda gets in the act. I'm sitting there thinking, the second biggest software manufacturer, the head of Apple and Pixar, the biggest stockholder of the biggest media company in the world, and a two-time Academy Award-winning actress cannot get a DVD to play. This industry's got trouble. Finally, somebody came out of the kitchen, hit the right combinations of buttons, and we ended up watching A Bug's Life. So anyway. Now, this past weekend, we had a nifty weekend out in Chicago, the U.S. Sailing. We had a yacht club summit. And I made a comment in my opening remarks that no matter how many yacht clubs I've been to in the world, and I actually went and counted them, 392, have you ever noticed that the same 6 guys are sitting at the bar, and whatever the issue is, they're against it? Anyway. Then there was a year, the transatlantic race, 2005. It was, I was on board with 40 members of the Storm Trysail Club on the Stad Amsterdam, a 252-foot, 3-masted clipper ship, and off we went across the ocean. And at the skipper's meeting with our captain before leaving the dock here in New York, the captain asked if there's any questions. And one of our esteemed members of the Storm Trysail Club puts his hands up in the air and says, "Do we have to hike out all the way across the ocean?" No, I don't think we need to do that. And somebody calculated that, I didn't realize how much clipper ships roll, but somebody calculated we made 119,000 rolls going across the ocean. And the highlight of the trip, halfway across the ocean, I talked the captain into allowing us to get into a dinghy to film this remarkable ship with all 18 sails set. 30-knot winds, 15-foot waves, and everybody in the dinghy puked the whole time, up and down. And as we were approaching England, and as you all know that have done ocean racing, when you're getting to the finish line, Channel fever. We were mighty glad to get to Bermuda last year, weren't we, Gus, after that Gulf Stream across. And everybody's just waiting to get there. So here we are, we're getting to the entrance to Cowes, the Isle of Wight, and another 12 hours or so, and we're going to be in Cowes in safety, and we'll have a nice time in London, etc. Well, as we're coming in, the night before we arrive, every night the captain would put on the wall the weather forecast for the next day. And he puts this weather forecast, and there on the wall is this gigantic low, an L. And he says, 100-year storm called Moroccan Red. It's coming in. It's going to delay our arrival in England. We might have to sail up to the Irish Sea for a day or two before we can turn around when the storm passes. You could hear the collective groan of 40 members of the Storm Trysail Club. Oh no, what about my airplane tickets? I got shows in London. How are they going to do that? Click. He shows the picture 12 hours later. And where the big low was, suddenly there's a big H. He had taken 40 members of the Storm Trysail Club. There is no such thing as Moroccan Red. But anyway. Now, I wonder here, who here has ever gotten into a protest in a sailboat race? Let me assure you, it is no fun to be in a protest in a sailboat race, because no matter how right you are, 50% of the time, you just might lose. So the best thing to do, I learned at the Maritime College, is stay out of the protest room. It's okay to give a little room. But as you can imagine, in my long career, I've had some memorable protests in my career. Here's one of them. I'm racing in Lymington, England, match race regatta, and I did a darn fool thing. I got into a protest with an Irishman. Irishmen, they're good talkers. Well, anyway, here I am presenting next to the Irishman, Harold Cudmore. You can just imagine the 5 members of the British jury with their double-breasted blazers, very formal thing, the Irishman and the American. And Harold starts explaining why he thought we had fouled him. He starts talking when suddenly all this noise is coming down from the roof. I'm looking up and what's going on there? Now it was my turn. And I started talking and explaining the truth, what really happened. And once again, all this noise is coming from the ceiling. And with that, I noticed that there was a camera in the corner like we have here. So I asked the head of the jury, are you taping our presentation? And he says, no, we're just broadcasting it to the people upstairs, and they're letting us know from the bar what they think of your testimony banging on the floor. Hey, I work for ESPN. I played right to that camera and won the protest, so. Now, there are great moments in sailing, and I have had some defeats along the way, but occasionally you get a great victory. And a great victory is when you can fake out another team. So here's the deal. We are heading for a buoy 40 miles away off Sardinia. And we're in second place again, a half a mile behind another boat and reaching. And as we're heading for our buoy 40 miles away, up on the bow appeared a mark that was about 3 miles away. And the question is that a mark of the course? And if it is, which way to pass it? So we went down and got the race instructions, which were conveniently written in Italian. So we couldn't figure it out. But clearly, the boat ahead of us could not figure it out too. So as they're approaching the mark, sailing along in a close reach, we could see them harden up to pass it to starboard. Then they bore off hard to pass it to port, and at the last second, up they went and they passed the mark to starboard, which gave me an idea. So as we come galumping along at 12 knots, a few minutes later, we go to pass it to starboard just like they did, and then at the last minute, bore off hard and pass the buoy to port. My good friend Tom Whidden is the tactician on the other boat. I can see that he's got his binoculars looking at us as we pass the mark to port. And with that, 23 members of the crew of the other boat all stood up and the boat tacked to come back. 2 maxi boats, 12 knots each, 24-knot engagement, passing within a half a length. No crew on either boat acknowledging the existence of the other as we went past. Well, it was so much fun in the bar after the race to find out it was not a mark of the course. They did not need to come back, but we won the race. One of my favorite stories. This is a little bit offbeat, but I'm sure you can relate. So it's during one of the America's Cup summers, and there was a function at the New York Yacht Club, and all the crew of Courageous was there, and jacket and tie, because there were syndicate people there. And anyway, after the function, one of our syndicate members, O.L. Pitts, now 96 years old, from Fort Worth, Texas, decides to take our crew out to dinner. And we go up to 3rd Avenue and 57th Street to some swanky restaurant, and I get there early. And I tell the maitre d' we're going to be a crew of 16 people, and he gives me an up and down and says, son, we got a 2-hour wait tonight. There's a line around the block. I don't think you're going to get in. Well, about 10 minutes later, Mr. Pitts shows up in his limousine, and he comes in and says, Mr. Pitts, this is a bad night. They got a 2-hour wait and a line around the block. We're not going to get in. Really, he says, you come with me, son. And he goes up to the maitre d' and he says to the maitre d', would $1,000 get the job done? About 3 minutes later, tables are being put together, tablecloths being spread out, and there we are, all 16 of us sitting there. And I'm next to Mr. Pitts. I said, you know, Mr. Pitts, that was really nice, but it certainly wasn't worth $1,000. He says, $1,000 hell. Once I got credibility out the window, it cost me $50. And then there was this summer in San Francisco Bay that we had a 6-meter out there. And the crew dinner the night before the first race, Tom Blackhauler, the great late Tom Blackhauler, and Ted Turner get into it. And Tom bangs the glass and he says, well, Ted, I know you got your America's Cup crew, but you're new to San Francisco Bay. What do you say we have a wager on the races tomorrow? And Ted, without missing a beat, says, well, Tom, how much you got? Tom hesitated there for a little bit. Well, how about $1,000 a race? And with that, Mr. Pitt says, $1,000 a race? Hell, we could go a couple hundred years at that rate. It was perfect. We raced for beers after that. And as you can imagine, Thomas David Blackhauler Jr. had a real rivalry with his friend Dennis Conner. One time we get in a protest in the 12 meters in front of the New York Yacht Club Selection Committee. Of course, Tom would fill out the protest form, and it would be spelled Denise Conner, which got Dennis all... And this young guy, Paul Kayard, 23 years old, is the port tailor on the boat. And before the start of a race, and you can imagine the scene with the two 12 meters luffing a few feet apart, everybody's stern face, 2.5 minutes to go. And out of the blue, unexpectedly, Paul Kayard pulls out of his satchel a grenade. And he pulls the pin and lobs it into Dennis's cockpit. They scattered and made some noise with the selection committee. Paul got the next week off. But it was a great moment. It really scared the hell out of him. So I thought that was... And Blackhauler, you know, he was a guy, he was a man's man, and I love this story about him and Bill Ficker sailing the Star. And Bill Ficker was on port tack and dipping Tom, who was on starboard in the Star class, and he just missed, and he clobbered the stern of Blackhauler's boat. And now he's got a big ding. And Blackhauler, after the race, Ficker, you got to fix my boat. So the next morning, Ficker shows up with a 2x4 with a nail kind of sticking through it, goes over to the stern of the boat, nails in the 2x4, stands back and says, okay, Tom, fixed. And I love this story. I went to a party not too long ago, about 1.5 years ago, and it was for an elderly guy, now well in his 80s, and he had decided it was time for him to retire from yacht racing. And it was cold in the winter, fireplaces going, and I noticed on his shelf that he had a brick of metal. And on the brick of metal, he had engraved Yacht Racing 1954-2009. He had taken every trophy he had won, melted it down, there it was. So no matter what goes on in sailing, now, I do write about a few heroes in here, and one of the greats in our lifetime is Buddy Melges. Buddy is one of the superstars of our sport, Olympic gold, Olympic bronze, America's Cup helmsman. And I just want to tell a quick story about the first time I met Buddy Melges. It was the East Scow Nationals on Little Egg Harbor, 25 knots of breeze, 85 East Scouts all lining up for the line. And I was crewing on a boat with a fellow named Tom Chapman, and all these boats are lining up, the gun goes off, and with that, one boat crosses all boats on port tack. And unlike all of us that have the spinnaker pole back, nose diving downwind, Buddy Melges has got the pole on a headstay, reaching back and forth. I've never seen a boat so far ahead in my life than the first time I saw Buddy Melges sail. He was quite the inspiration. Very special guy. Last summer, 81 years old, 31 A Scows at the Inland Championship, with all the top sailors there, won. Pretty impressive, wouldn't you agree? So anyway, Buddy Melga's. Now, one quick other story. We're down at some celebrity pro-am regatta down in Freeport in the Bahamas, and there's 15 of these tartan 10s, and there's a problem. One of the boats, the Speedo doesn't work, and the question is, does everybody have to turn their Speedos off? And Buddy Melga's broke the ice and said, I got a question. What's a Speedo? It was perfect. He always had a good way with words. How about this regatta? You ever hear of the America's Cup? Now there's a regatta that never ceases to amaze me. My first time actually seeing the cup boats, I was 12, 1962. Our family had taken a little ride through New England, and we passed through Newport, and standing there on Fort Adams, there were the 12 meters being towed out to the start. The mast going up into the clouds, all the crew wearing uniforms. And I didn't realize at the age of 12 that, lucky me, I would end up being one of those crew 15 years later on Courageous. Of course, what I didn't know when I was 12 that I found out when I was 27 is what the crews really talked about on the way out to the starting line. Who was with who in the bar the night before, and all the things that young people talk about. And there are a couple fun stories about the America's Cup, so here's three. 1980, the selection committee, the esteemed New York Yacht Club Commodore Race Committee, selection committee decides to have a meeting. And they're upset with us on the cruise because we're not covering properly. And as we all know in match racing, the fundamental rule is you are to cover. Now these 8 gentlemen on the selection committee, believe it or not, all had the same first name, Commodore. So it was very easy. So anyway, 1980, and Commodore McCullough gives us a little speech about how disappointed he is and our covering techniques, and we need to do better if we're going to retain the America's Cup, and that's the purpose of the seminar. And we're sitting there, jacket and tie, and I'm sitting next to Ted Turner, and then the Commodore says, well, before we begin here with the seminar, does anybody have anything they would like to say? Ted puts his hand up, says, Commodore, I have something to say. We've been losing most of our races here this summer, so it's not us not covering. That's it, out. That was the end of our... Now, in the book, I talk about some of the adventure sailing that I've done, and I have done 3 trips south, 1 around Cape Horn and 2 down to Antarctica. In Antarctica, the frozen continent is quite a place. People ask, how is it? I say, cool. In Antarctica, 98% of the Antarctica is covered with ice, and 2/3 of the world's fresh water is trapped in ice in the frozen continent. And the first trip I took to Antarctica was on a 54-foot steeled hull sloop, Pelagic, with Skip Novak, and it was mighty cold. And we've been sailing across the Drake. It took about 80 hours, and we're coming up to this old research station that had been abandoned in the 50s, a place called Danko. And what we want to do is go look in the shack, because everything from the 50s is there. But the doors are locked up. We're not going to break anything. So how do we get in? So there was a crawl space. So I crawled underneath and looked around, and I found a hatch. So I stood up, opened the hatch, and looked around to realize that my head was sticking through the toilet seat. So with that, I told everybody, oh, I found the way in, got the TV camera, and filmed each one of them with their head sticking through the toilet seat. It was... Okay, now this is a story dedicated to all my friends from New York. So I hope you'll appreciate this. And Admiral, I hope you appreciate this. So the year is 1970, and this upcoming weekend is a very big regatta. It's the Mid-Atlantic Championships for the America Trophy. And the top 2 teams out of 16 are going to qualify for the national championship. Now, I'm a freshman at this time, and it was the first time that I actually made A division as a freshman, which you don't get to do too much. So I was really excited to perform and be the A division skipper. Friday night, there was a little basketball game going on here in New York. The score was 3-3. The LA Lakers with Wilt Chamberlain and Jerry West are up against Willis Reed and Dave DeBuscher and Bill Bradley and Dick Barnett. Anyway, it is this game. Now, I had this little thing that there was a door at Madison Square Garden, and if you showed up in uniform, sometimes the Garden would let you in to see the Knicks. And I showed up in my dress khakis, and the door opened up, and I remember and I gave him a huge tip, $2. A lot of money in 1970. And he said, I'm sorry, and there's about 15 sailors and servicemen there. I think we're a little full tonight. I mean, Game 7, NBA championship. I'm sorry, I don't think we have tickets. And with that, the door closes, and then it opens up and it says, son, I remember you. Remember I gave him a $2 tip last time. You wait right here. So I waited there for about 10 minutes, and the door opened up, and in I went through the door. He said, look, there's only standing room, but here's your seats. And I was up in the rafters getting a nosebleed, and there I was standing, but I was in. I noticed behind the Knicks bench, there was an empty seat, and there was a guy next to it, and I just, hey, what are you going to lose? 19 years old. Down I went and sat in the seat, and I'm sitting next to Dustin Hoffman. So I'm trying to act in my uniform like I belong, and I will never forget, and I might get teared up here talking about this, but you might remember, maybe you do, that Willis Reed was hurt. And the Knicks were up 3-1, but without Willis Reed, they lost 2 in a row. Now they're back at Madison Square Garden, and Reed was nowhere to be seen. Sitting behind the bench, after the national anthem is played, suddenly the Garden announcer with that great organ music announces that starting center is Willis Reed. And Willis Reed comes out from the side, starting with a limp, and runs across, I'm telling you, I get tears in my eyes with this, and runs across the court. He lost the tap, but somehow Frazier got the ball, sent it to Reed. Reed got the first 2 baskets. He got pulled out of the game. He re-injured himself. Walt Frazier had 37 points that night, and they beat the LA Lakers. The game ends. It is a tremendous thing. And all the excitement, there I am in my dress khakis. I go, Dustin Hoffman, I go running with the team into the locker room. Now I'm in. I'm in, so I got the score sheet, the scorecard, and there's a picture in here. And I got all the Knicks, autographs, including Dustin Hoffman. And here's the sidebar story. So that game was on ABC. And Howard Cosell was the commentator for that game. And there he is interviewing Willis Reed and Dave DeBuscher. And while I was ill on ESPN Classic one night, I'm watching TV, and this game comes on. And there's Howard Cosell interviewing DeBuscher and Reed. And there's this pimply-faced kid with brown hair. Sitting there looking. Anyway, it was a great moment. And I got so revved up, I clobbered everybody in A Division and went on to the Nationals that year. So anyway. Okay. You know another guy that I met, a great athlete here in New York, who, by the way, in my view, is still the greatest football player to ever play the game? Can you guess who it is? Joe Namath. Joe Namath. The Jets used to have their training facility in New Jersey at Monmouth College. And I spent a summer working at the Asbury Park Press, where my father was the managing editor. And several times I got to go to the practice facility, and I met Joe Namath. Now here I am. I'm 18 years old with my little notebook and going to interview. And Joe Namath always took the time to answer a couple questions by me. And that stuck with me my entire life, of how important it is to be nice to people from the press when they come around. And again, I did my little sneaking in act. And when the Jets in December of 1968 beat the John Madden-led Oakland Raiders, somehow I got myself into the locker room, and I have all the Jets autographs, and they went on to win the Super Bowl in 1969. Very cool, huh? So you thought I was going to talk about sailing. Okay, you game for about 3 or 4 more? All right, defining moment in my career. So after the '87 America's Cup, which was a huge success for the worldwide leader in sports, ESPN, a year later I got the nod to cover the Olympic Games for NBC. And the folks at NBC said, well, look, we're probably not even going to cover sailing, but you did a good job at the America's Cup, and maybe you can see something out there, and if it's really good, we might let you do a 4 or 5 minute report. So each day I started doing reports, 4 or 5 minutes, but I got lucky. This was supposed to be a light air venue at Busan, South Korea, but in fact, a front came through for a week and it blew 25 to 30 knots. And we had the same cameraman that we had used in Fremantle that had really good, steady pictures. And as we were coming toward the close of the regatta, I was covering the fin class, and there was a good friend of mine from Canada named Lawrence Lemieux, who I'd raced fins against. And Lawrence, he was 34, which is old for a fin sailor, was coming downwind in the lead. All he had to do was round the leeward mark, sail back up to the finish line, and my friend was going to get a bronze medal. So on this chase boat going up and down, we got the cameraman, and we're filming Lawrence coming downwind. He's going great. He's surfing waves, and we're getting good shots and everything. When suddenly, on the other course, a 470 with 2 young 19-year-olds from Singapore capsized and went upside down. And Lawrence Lemieux, without missing a beat, as we do in sailing, abandoned his race, went over to rescue those kids until a patrol boat came along. Well, he did not get his bronze medal, but he did get the Olympic Sportsman Medal, which is given to only one athlete in all sports, and I was out there filming it. So that great moment got Lawrence the International Olympic Committee Sportsman for the year, and my report on NBC got me an Emmy. So anyway, kind of a fun thing. Trouble on Courageous. Our friend Ted misbehaved. I wish he was sitting here. Ted and I were together on Saturday night in Chicago. We had great fun. I probably should have brought this one up. But anyway, in the summer of 1980, when we were losing most of our races, it was a sad day when our mast broke. So we had to get our replacement mast, which was pretty slow, and we weren't doing well, losing race after race with this pretzel mast. And anyway, Ted, we're walking down to the boat. We had these famous walks to the boat. And Ted says, hey, I had dinner with Ben Lexon last night. Ben Lexon, formerly Bob Miller. Why would you change your name from Bob Miller to Ben Lexon, I don't know. And Lexon was the combination of the 2 dogs he had. It was a character. I've invited Ben Lexon to come sail with us tomorrow. And he's a real expert on rigs and masts, and he's going to help us out. Now, Ben Lexon is the designer of the Australian boat. So I ask a silly question. Well, that sounds good, Ted. Have you talked to the selection committee about this? I'm not sure they're going to see the humor. So anyway, he goes up to the shack, no cell phones in those days, puts his 10 cents into the telephone and calls the selection committee and comes down, Doc. We're all set. Benny can come. Okay, here's a green shirt, and off we did to do the race. Well, I thought Dennis Conner was going to pop his head off when we're luffing before the start, and Dennis sees Ben Lexon grinding the winches. The race ends, and the selection committee comes over, and with that, one of the Commodores looking over the bow says, in a very formal tone, Captain Turner. Yes, sir. Can you tell us who your mechanic is aboard your boat? He told him we were taking a mechanic. He just didn't tell him it was Ben Lexon. Anyway, we got excused for the remainder of the July trials. Whatever happened to great names of boats? Vim, Valiant, Intrepid, Courageous, Freedom, Liberty, Stars and Stripes. Fujimo? Better Than Sex? Euro Trash Girl? Nasty Medicine? Here's one that you'll appreciate. So the great late Walter Cronkite is narrating a film for me on the history of the America's Cup. And Walter, and he was getting older, he was 92 at the time, is reading the script, And the words are something, and this year the American entry is a boat named BMW Oracle Racing. And Cronkite stops the narration and goes, that can't possibly be right. Has anybody here seen the films Mad Men? Janice and I have been watching. We're at almost the end of year 3, and we're going to start watching year 4. But anyway, it's a great thing. But this is a little story about marketing. Marketing is fundamental to doing well if you want to sell your boats. And so this guy from the New York Yacht Club, measurer, named Francis Swigeth, decides that we need a small boat, and a boat for, say, 2 people, a little keel boat, and this would be good. So he calls this boat, because it's little, the Bug. And he takes the Bug down the Jersey Shore, down Long Island Sound, out Cape Cod, and all summer he tries to sell his boat, the Bug, and he doesn't sell a single boat. That winter he's having a lunch with a friend of his up here on Madison Avenue, and the friend's thinking, the Bug. Maybe people don't want to own a boat named the Bug. Why don't you call it something a little better? How about the Star? And the Star's done pretty well ever since. And then 40 years ago, 1971, a guy who designed a little dinghy, when I was at Maritime, he asked me to come up and sail this dinghy and see what I thought about it. And the name of the boat was a Weekender. So I went up and sailed this Weekender off American Yacht Club. By the way, there was a pole there with an arrow. And I couldn't decide whether that points to the rock or the way to go. I forget which way I went, but it was wrong. So I dented the Weekender's centerboard. And again, he spent a year trying to sell his Weekender, and he didn't sell very many of them. And he had a friend come down from Canada, and they were having lunch, and the guy said, you know, the Weekender, that's not racy. You need a modern name. How about the Laser? And the Laser's done pretty well ever since, too. Now, this is a story my friend Tad here, right there. Look at this guy. This is for you.
I may have done the crime, but I've done the time.
So Tad is finished up his freshman year at Princeton, and he's now driving an ice cream truck. He did better after that. But at the time, he's driving an ice cream truck. And this weekend, coming up, the 420 Nationals are coming to Barnegat Bay. And I hadn't really sailed a 420 before, but it sounded pretty cool. And anyway, we're going to sail the 420. Well, about 2 days before the regatta, my friend Tad says, hey, there's this rock concert coming up this weekend. Why don't you go with me? We're going to make a lot of money selling ice cream, and forget the 420 Nationals. So I went to my father. Dad, what do you think? He says, look, you can go to a rock concert any weekend you want, but the 420 Nationals only comes to Barnegat Bay once in a lifetime. I recommend you sail. I did. I think I ended up 28th or something in the 420 Nationals, and as it turned out, we ended up missing Woodstock. I'm sure we would have sold all those ice cream bars up there, but I think my father knew what he was talking about. All right, we're coming down the stretch here. You've been mighty patient. Some of my favorite sayings in sailing: for every crew you add to your boat, you square your potential problems. 2 crew, 2 lunches. 3 crew, 9 problems. You get the gist. And I have this theory that if you stay in the sport of sailing long enough, eventually you sail with everybody, which I think is kind of true. And I'll never forget being on a maxi boat. Butch, you'll enjoy this story, but I'm with the great Lowell North. And North comes back into the cockpit on this maxi boat and says, well, let me take the backstay up and let's see what it can take. We found out. Mast right over the side. And why is it that some skippers yell more and more about less and less? And my all-time favorite, again from the Maritime College, I don't know who told me this. It was some aging captain who was probably 46 at the time, but anyway, he seemed old to me. He said, if you can't tie good knots, tie plenty of them. I thought that was... All right, I'm coming down this stretch here. This regatta is called the Hall of Fame Regatta. And for some reason, I got invited to sail in it, and I had a young crew, Hank Stewart and Judd Smith, crewing for me. And in this regatta, Buddy Melges, Paul Elstrom, Lowell North, Dennis Conner, Ted Turner, Tom Blackall, all these superstars, Arthur Knapp, all these superstar sailors. And on the first start of the first race, I could see the wind going left, and I worked down to the buoy end, the port end, and tacked and crossed the fleet. As we're crossing the fleet, my crew, Hank, says, well, you got Elstrom by a length, Buddy by half a length. And as these names are getting reeled off, my left leg starts shaking. What am I doing here with these people? My crew, Judge Smith, a wizard at sailing, is staring at the jib on the leeward side, and he hears my nervousness in my voice, and looking at the jib, he says, ease the backstay a 1/4 inch. So with that, I took the backstay, let one sprocket of the cam cleat go, put the backstay down. Judd, without taking his eyes off the sail, says, that's better now. Man, if this guy can see that, doing that, I'm sure it was all psychological, but we did end up winning that regatta. All right. So one of my favorite stories, Tony, this story is for you, is here in New York Harbor. Now, it is rare, especially 20 years ago, to race in New York Harbor. But anyway, we're doing this regatta, and it was a big event. 8 countries, and I'm representing the USA. When you have USA on your sail, you want to take it seriously. It means a lot. So all week long, we're eliminating down tennis ladder like the NCAA championship, and I make the finals. Me and my crew and this Beneteau something make the finals up against some country called Australia. The same Australian crew that several years earlier had taken the America's Cup away from the New York Yacht Club. Now I'm racing them in New York Harbor. You get the gist. So it's the final race of the series. The wind is coming out of the south under the Verrazano Bridge, and we're going downwind with spinnakers. But there's a problem. The current is ebbing out of the Hudson in East Rivers at about 3 or 4 knots, and we're barely making progress down the shoreline. At this moment, the Australians are a boat length behind me. When you have a boat a length behind you, you're feeling the pressure, you're feeling the heat. I'm thinking, how are we going to keep this boat behind us? I got an idea. I sent Judd Smith down below to look at the chart with this question: how deep is it behind Liberty and Ellis Island? He reports it's 5 feet deep at mean low tide. We draw 6, but it's mid-tide. So as we crept up to the ferry dock where the tourist boats come in without warning, we jibed away from the Australians to go behind the island, leaving them in the current. We got around behind Liberty Island. Guess what? We found North America. But Hank's a big guy, 220 pounds, got on the end of the boom. We heeled the boat over, got off the mud flat, went on past Liberty, continued past Ellis, jibed out into the current where the leeward mark, and went on to win the race. Thank you very much, but my story doesn't end there. Fast forward an entire year. An entire year goes by, and we eliminate all week long, and we end up in the finals against the same Huey Trahan and Australians again. It's the last race of the regatta. The wind is coming out of south under the Verrazano Bridge. The current is ebbing out of the harbor at 3 or 4 knots. But the difference this year is the Australians are a boat length ahead of us. I had no idea how hard it is to pass somebody up current from you going downwind. And as we crept up to this ferry dock, without warning, the Australians jibe away from us to pull the same trick on us that we had pulled on them a year earlier. Now, the sad part about this story is we did not have our onboard ESPN cameras or microphones to see the look on their faces and what they had to say when they got around behind the island to find out that that winter, a bridge had been built. It's there, a bridge from Ellis Island over to New Jersey, 8 feet high. We won that race too. Okay. So let me just talk about the book, and then I have a movie at 62 minutes, and I'm going to show you 4 minutes of it. But anyway, I say this with all due modesty. I can't believe this is the 17th book that I've written in my career. And all the books I've done to date are pretty much technique, how to race, how to sail. And this is the first time I've taken on my memoirs. And it's a little bit bold, I think, to write your own memoirs. But I got inspired several years ago reading books of some of the sailors of the past, like Olin Stevens and Harold Vanderbilt and Clinton Crane, Gerard Lambert, Bill Snaith, Sherman Hoyt, Nathaniel Harrisoff. I mean, their stories jumped out of the pages. And with that, I thought maybe at turning the age of 60, nobody else is 60 here, are they? Sorry. Anyway, I thought it would be fun to tell this story and put it together. A couple stats here. First of all, the dedication. Now, I've had a lot of books, 16 previous books, my kids, my friends, a lot of people, but this one's for Janice, my wife here. To a great mother, teacher, nurse, and friend, thanks for being my lifelong partner. Thank you very much. So this book is for you. And I think Cynthia and Susan can both confirm this, but there are 423 people mentioned in this book. And my friend Jeff Mason suggested that I not do an appendix because people go to the back and look for their name, and that's how they read the book. And that saved 10 pages to put more pictures and some more stuff in there. So there is no appendix, but I'm going to tell you about half the people in this room at least are mentioned in here somewhere. So you have to read the whole book to see that. It's 83,000 words. There are 118 photographs, and somebody said, how long did it take you to write? And the answer is 60 years to come up with this story. And I hope you'll read it and pass it around. Better yet, buy a couple hundred of them and send them to everybody you know. But it's a cross-section of what went on. I took a very positive tone. There's hardly any negativity to it. And we did get a color section. Thank you very much, Alex, for being able to do that. There is one picture I'm going to point out. This is me, and this is Ted. And you can see he's having a little discussion with me. My head is buried a little. Clearly, this race didn't go as planned, and I'm getting a little talking to about, let's not do it again. But anyway, it was a great moment. And Ted has read the book. He didn't stop. He kept going, and there's some racy things in here, and he didn't ask to change a thing, which shows the strength of Ted. So anyway, and I do have an interview, a long one with Dennis Conner in here, and Dennis tells some things about did he cover or not in that faithful 7th race, and he's never spilled the beans like you're going to be able to read in here. So anyway, that's a little bit a story of the book, and with that, let me finish with one story, and then I'm going to show a 4-minute trailer of the film, which I'll introduce. So one of the great weeks I had in sailing, while I was ill, my longtime friend Elizabeth Meyer had chartered Endeavor up in Maine, and she asked me to go for a sail for the week. And her cousin was there, and her cousin's girlfriend. So there were 4 of us and 8 professional crew to make sure that we were all happy. And the first morning of the cruise up by Hog Island, where Elizabeth has an island, the fog is clearing, and we start pulling up the anchor and the mainsail. And I got the most magic words spoken to me, the most important question you can be asked in a sport of sailing. I came up on deck and was asked, would you like to take the helm? So there I am on the wheel of the Endeavor with this mast, 168 feet, 184 feet high, 63-foot boom, and the jibs go up by the professional crew, the anchor gets hauled up, and we're sailing underway. The boat heels over about 15 degrees in the 15 knot southwesterly. And at the helm now, sailing upwind at 10 knots, I looked up, and there, above the mast, was a bird. I think the bird could relate to the shape of our sails with the shape of his wing. And that bird in the sky, and the sails, with my body on the deck, my hands on the wheel, my feet on the deck, the boat underneath me, the water going, it was like everything existed as one. And isn't that the magic of our sport? The time that we spent with our best friends in life when we're out there on the water. For better or for worse, win or lose, once you've been on the same boat at the same time, you have a common bond. It's pretty special. I think it's fair to say that your best friends in life are those that share the same passion that we all love so much, being out there in the water. So anyway, that's a little look, a sailor's life. I hope you'll read the book. Thank you very much for listening. Thanks. Now, Thank you. Thank you very much. So that concludes the first half. No. Just a couple things of what I've been working on lately. I have a very nifty film that I'm doing. I'm so inspired. I spent all day yesterday up at Mystic Seaport, and I'm doing a documentary on the great Irving and Exie Johnson. They did 7 world cruises on their Yankees and took all kinds of young people. And I've interviewed about a dozen of these people, all now in their 80s, and what it was like to be with Irving and Exie. And I must say, the footage that they shot is remarkable. So sometime this summer, this is going to come out. I'm again looking forward to doing my 7th year racing the Collegiate Nationals. I'm sorry nobody filmed me when I was racing, because I would really like to know if I could roll tack as well as these young people. But the College Nationals never ceases to amaze me, how good these kids are. Last year, Boston College, sure you'll be happy about that, won the Nationals, 18 teams, but they won it with a 5.8 average. So 18 teams, 5.8 doesn't sound that great. That's what it took to win. Last place last year was Stanford from California, and they had an 11.8 average. So you think 11.8 average out of 18 is not that bad. They were last. And then it dawns on me that 6 points separates the difference between first and last at the College Nationals. With Gus, and thanks to Thomson Reuters, we're going to do a film on the Annapolis Newport this year, and the Marblehead Halifax, and Gus has promised no fog. All the way to Halifax. And then, of course, the Invitational Cup with the New York Yacht Club, which is turning about to be one of the great amateur events now. And I think we have 19 teams coming here from, there are 4 American clubs. New York still has their eliminations to go. So we'll see who represents the yacht club. But 3 clubs, 2 of which I'm a member, Annapolis and Eastern have qualified, and Newport Harbor from California. So I'm quite sure that that 5th place average will probably be what it takes to win that regatta. So I'm looking forward to, that'll be in high def on ESPN2. And one other thing that I want to show you, a 4-minute clip, and then we're done. I started working about a year and a half ago on something totally outside the sport of sailing, on energy. Where are we going in this country? And it's a confusing time, particularly now after the horrific events that happened in Japan. But it's a good question. And I almost think Obama maybe should have taken on energy before healthcare, but anyway, energy is vital to all of us. So over the past year and a half, I went and interviewed 36 people that are all experts in the energy field. The guy that started Greenpeace, the guy that started the Whole Earth Catalog, the guy that runs Duke Energy, Christy Todd Whitman, who ran the EPA, the guy that runs Idaho National, and I really got an education of that. And this film will be coming out in a couple weeks, and it's a strong statement. Now, I know I'm going to get hate mail from the Union of Concerned Scientists who are vehemently anti-nuke, but I believe that nuclear power has to be some part of the equation along with renewables like wind and solar. So with that, I thought we'd look at a 4-minute clip, and then we'll call it a night. Okay.
Look around. Everything we consume, food, clothes, transportation, entertainment, requires power. Everything. Energy rules our society, moves our machinery, keeps our production lines running. Our very lifelines depend on energy every minute of every day. We take energy for granted. Our very existence depends on energy. But what if we were to wake up one morning and find it was all gone?
For some reason or other, there was a power failure in northern New York or southern Canada.
The Northeast power outage of August 14, 2003 affected 45 million people in 8 states. Their lives changed in an instant. In New York City, with no subways or buses, people walked home across bridges.
We are certainly not out of the woods yet. There are still many people who do not have electricity.
Imagine if that blackout had lasted a week, a month. It could happen.
For a lot of years, people have said there was no need for more energy, that we could stop it where it presently is. We don't need to add power supply to the system.
We really haven't been thinking about our energy infrastructure, and it's under a lot of strain just with what we have now in power demand. So looking at a 21% increase in demand by 2030, that's coming at us pretty fast. We've got to start investing right now in that future.
Energy requirements in both North American and European countries are projected to increase by 20 to 25% by 2030. In developing countries, energy requirements are expected to double in that same time period.
Despite what people would like to see happen on a global basis, the International Energy Agency predicts a continuing increase in the use of fossil fuels globally. I think they're probably right.
The carbon emissions produced by the United States and China far exceed that of other countries. Burning coal, oil, and natural gas is the main source of carbon emissions. If these emissions are not reduced, our health is at risk.
The global problem is the combination of three things: energy, need for economic growth, but carbon emissions, climate change. So if we get our energy and our economic growth at the cost of emitting billions of tons of carbon into the atmosphere, we're all going to fry.
We are, I think, skating at the ragged edge of what could be a climatic tipping point. It is not in our interest, in my judgment, to court how close we can traipse toward that edge without tipping the climate. And therefore, it seems to me the only prudent public policy is to do everything that we can do now to avert it. And we can't afford the luxury of just sort of wringing our hands in woe. We really got to roll up our sleeves and get some base hits here and get onto the playing field.
The atmosphere is not giving us a free pass. The clock keeps ticking. Essentially, we are spending the carbon emissions budget of our children and grandchildren. In fact, we may exhaust the budget in the next 25 to 30 years for a prudent level.
It's important to be concerned about how much CO2 we're putting into the atmosphere. It's important to try to slow down the rate at which we are changing the chemical composition of our atmosphere. But with 6.5 to 8 billion people on this planet, there are certain things you just can't do without destroying the civilization that you're trying to save in the first place. We don't want the cure to be worse than the disease here.
All right, I hope you'll watch. Thank you for watching.
As John Biddle used to say, you're all dismissed.